Good morning, everybody. A spooky morning to you all. Welcome to day 3. Sadly, our final day of halfway to Halloween, but we have got a lot of fun stuff for you planned today. And today is an exciting one because we are opening up with some authors that have been with Horrific Network for a really long time. Like going back, we got linked up with Crystal Lake Publishing. And Joe had sent us these guys, and I go back to the early Horrific podcast, and you'll know how much I love their work. And they've come on repeatedly since then because I love their work. So I'm very excited to bring onto the show. First up, Mr. Kenneth W. Cain. How are you doing, sir?
Good. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Another horror author from way back. Getting the first copies of his horror novel, and then he has come on again because he's also done like children's, like more lighthearted stuff too, but keeping like a horror theme with werewolves and stuff, which is very cool. Mr. Robert Holt, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And this guy actually I met at Sinister Creature Con, and my parents were shopping at the booths while I was doing panels, and they met Josh, and they bought all of his books after talking to him, and they had him transcribe. And Josh's transcription, before I even met him, said, "To Jimmy, you have kick-ass parents. Have a nice time. Love, Josh." And I like opened it up, and I'm like, I got a break. I'm going to go find this guy's table. And I got to talking with him, and then I got to reading his books, and he later came on after I read his books. He writes these books in like found fiction style that is like really, really rad. So a chapter will be like a news press release, and then you'll go to a transcript of a cell phone conversation and stuff. It's pretty interesting stuff. Mr. Josh Hancock, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And then lastly, joining us, a surprise addition. He's been away from my show for a while as the co-host, but today he is able to join us. Super stoked about it. Coincidentally, he happens to be a published author, and he has had some of his stories on the No Sleep podcast. So I welcome Mr. Charlie Williams to the conversation. How are you doing, man?
Good to see you, Jim. Good to see everybody.
Yeah, so for this, you guys, are in a particular interesting case that I would love for this to be the opening question, because it's almost like what came first, the chicken or the egg, where your guys' books all depict these stories in a way in which I can imagine them becoming films rather easily. So I'm curious, as you set on your path to become an author, what were each of you first? Fans of scary stories or a fan of scary movie? I mean, we can start with Ken and then work our way around.
So I was actually always a fan of the scary movies. When I was, and this probably is going to sound awful, but when I was like 4 years old, my mom was watching scary movies on TV, and I'd always be lurking in the background, and as I progressed in age, watching Psycho and The Omen movies and all that stuff. So, but I also, like when I was in like 5th grade, I think I heard the story of Baba Yaga for the first time, and it just kind of, I was just so intrigued by that whole folklore of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't think I really found horror until I was maybe 16 or 17, working graveyard shift at Pepperidge Farms, and I was just on call all the time. My parents had all these Writer's Digest books on the wall, and I started reading Poe, and I got so interested in Poe that I wanted to get into more horror writers, and so I started going to the local used books shop, which you don't see a lot of those nowadays, do you? And I picked up my first Stephen King book, which was It, and I fell in love. And
God, what a one to start.
Yeah.
start with the 10-pounder.
Absolutely a treasure in my collection too. So
Cool.
Robert, what about you, man?
When I released my kids' book, I kind of did this whole retrospective thing. I went back and kind of explored when I really started in my horror development and all that. And yeah, I think it goes back with stories to bedtime stories that my dad used to tell me. Once it would scare the hell out of me. And as soon as he was done telling it, it'd be like, tell it again. And I kind of grew from there. Then I went through a realm there where I was like 9, 10, where I really got into classic horror. The Dracula and Frankenstein, all the Universal movies. I watched those like crazy over and over again. And then like strangely, the movies that scared me, I would just like obsess over, whether it be Ghost and Mr. Chicken, or I saw The Shining, I think, for the first time when I was like 12 or 13, and I watched it every day for like a month with my hands over my eyes. And yeah, it's kind of a mix. I think I first fell in love with just those bedtime stories, though, that were terrifying. I don't know why my dad did that to me, but
That's cool, man. We can work it out. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, very, very much the same thing as our other authors here. I grew up in the pre-Blockbuster age, in the Betamax age. I can still remember us getting a Betamax machine and then eventually a VHS machine, and going to the video stores, the mom and pop video stores before Blockbuster. And so it started there for me. My dad would take me to the video store. I was pretty much allowed to rent within reason, whatever I wanted. So movies like Dawn of the Dead, The Exorcist, of course, Friday the 13th, Halloween, rented those just nonstop, and would bring like a stack of Betamax or VHS tapes to my room and just watch them all day and all night. So it really started there, and then started peeking around my parents' bookshelf. And I can remember very clearly that they had Stephen King books on the top shelf, and I can remember Cujo being there and The Shining being there. But the book that I really remember that in my memory was on the very top shelf, it probably wasn't, but that's how I picture it now, the shelf that I couldn't reach, was this dusty hardcover with no dust jacket of The Exorcist, the book. And sure wish I still had that old copy. And I would take that down when my parents weren't looking, and I would flip to all the good parts, and for a 9-10-year-old kid, the good parts were, the parts with bad language, or parts that I didn't quite understand, but I knew were for adults. And then it just grew from there. And that, to this day, The Exorcist is one of my favorite novels, obviously one of my probably top 3 movies, but the book has remained, one of my most favorite books of all time. So, it's interesting to hear that our parents, played a role. They didn't know what kind of monsters they were shaping, I guess, but they definitely did.
Charlie, what about you, man?
It's interesting to listen to these 3 guys talk about how they became interested in horror and were exposed to horror films, because I'm older than you guys on the panel. So I go back to the 1950s, and my family were dairymen. They were farmers. So my dad would always go to bed early, especially on Friday night, Saturday night. So my mom and I would stay up late, and we'd watch the old Shock Theater movies, which was this group of Universal films that they sold to television, because television was so new, and local television, that they were starved for content. So they would buy these old movies, these old horror films, and they would show them late at night. And they were so shocking, like the Wolfman and Frankenstein and the real old Universal stuff. So that started my love of horror films. And then I just continued it as I got older. And I went through that monster kid phase when Famous Monsters of Filmland was, the magazine all the kids wanted to look at in 5th and 6th grade. And some kids outgrew that, and I never did. So I always kept that interest. And I think it was because, when you're interested in horror and you're interested in science fiction and, fantasy films, the world becomes very large. It really expands. I mean, there's this whole world of possibilities. Anything can happen instead of having this little narrow worldview. And I think that appealed to me. So I've just always kept that love of the things that go bump in the night. But it's interesting that we've all mentioned our parents. So I think that's the root.
And a lot of us have mentioned Stephen King.
Yeah, right.
Begs the question that I know, fans of his work always have, is the book versus the movie. And two of the movies that stand out of King's are It, the original, the TV miniseries, and The Shining. And I know he hated The Shining. I'm not sure how he necessarily felt. I think he liked it. I don't remember reading ever any story of him being displeased with Tim Curry's depiction of Pennywise or anything that they had to cut out for obvious reasons. But The Shining, he was really not happy with. And from a film background and going to film school, I'm like, how are you not happy with that film? Like, that film is one of the most iconic horror films, and Jack Nicholson, that performance is one of the most iconic horror performances. That when you're studying filmmaking and how you want your actors to portray a certain role, if you're going to do crazy, just mentally not on the brink, way past it, serial killer, look at Jack Nicholson's face in The Shining, towards the second and third act of that film. And for King, which God knows, to sit there and write that novel, the feeling of putting it in somebody else's hands has got to be scary in its own right. I gotta imagine, I hate, letting somebody edit a scene that I've worked on. Putting that in some, that's a weird feeling. So what is your guys' take on the whole book versus movie thing? Do you think do you think there's justification in him being pissed at The Shining, or do you think that Kubrick did a solid job?
I think the reason why he was upset is because it, with any time you take a book and condense it into a movie,
right,
what ends up happening, you lose something, and so you got to pick what you lose. And I love both the book and the movie, and I actually love the new TV movie too. But in the book, I think the character's decline was less drastic. And so he was always this good guy that had moments of failure instead of a hard fall, And so I think that was maybe the issue, is just totally changed the character. You know what I mean? And still, it made for a very scary movie.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is an iconic scene. Him, limping around, dragging the axe.
Yeah.
But I think that was the issue. And you're going to have that. I mean, how many times have you read a book and you love the book, and then the movie comes out and you love the movie too, but it's completely different?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it happens. I mean, the hope is that you get close enough that it's like the new It movies. I thought were very good, very close to the source material, Different monsters though, because those older monsters weren't so relevant. And
Right.
and I think that was a good call, you know, for like modern day kids to attract them into the new movies. So
No, that's a really good point. If you write a movie, you know, Pet Cemetery being the best thing to point to as far as that goes, is you have to upgrade some stuff.
Right.
Otherwise it's not relevant. Robert, before you go, I want you to know there's a comment in the production chat room right now. And the reason why your dad would read you those scary stories every night is because he loved you very much.
I believe that's true.
That is true.
But I think with the Shining thing, I think it's overdone how much Stephen King hated the movie. I think he loved it. He listed it in Dance Macabre, you know, in his book about the genre and told in general. He listed it as one of the best movies ever made. So I think he loved it. I think there were some things about it he wished that Kubrick wouldn't do, but Kubrick in his own right is an artist. So
Yeah.
you give an artist an artist's license, he's going to change some things. And I think King wished he wouldn't have, but I think a lot of what is used now to, you know, talk about how much King hated the Shining movie is actually whenever USA made that miniseries, and he was trying to promote it. This one's so much better. This is, you know, and that's, I think that's kind of, that kind of, you know, it's not really true. I think he actually really liked the movie. But I think for the basic conversation though of film versus book, they're so different genres, different mediums, that it's almost like looking at a picture in a book, you know, a picture on a wall. You know, you can't capture it the same way. It's although I've read some things by Ramsey Campbell where he tried really hard, but you got to appreciate them both. You can't.
Not to turn it into the Stephen King cast, but that he's really the one author that I've read like 2 pages about the disembowelment of, you know, a certain character and everything that character was feeling, broken down to like the very instance in which their soul left their body. Like that dude, like when he gets like the handcuffs taken off, like, and he's allowed to like go on those diatribes, like he can paint a picture.
Hey guys, can I ask you a question that's more connected to the writing process? Can I jump in here and ask you a quick question? Because I'm always interested in this. I know you're Stephen. I take it that everybody's a Stephen King fan, and you've probably read On Writing and read about, you know, King's process and how he approaches it. And one thing that helped me with my own writing was his scheduling, where he comes in and he treats this like his job, and he sits down every morning at the same time and he'll write for 4 hours or 5 hours. And I was just wondering, do you guys have that kind of process, or do you do it in a more relaxed way? I mean, he had this consistent time frame, and he could I think that's why he knocks out books so quickly, is because he just stays with it. You know, he has this 4 or 5 hours a day. He hits the word processor, or however he writes down his stories, and you know, he gets it done. That he puts in his work. How do you guys approach the writing process? Is it something you do spontaneously, or is it something you do in a more organized way?
We'll start with Josh this time.
Yeah,
sure.
Josh.
Yeah, excuse me. It's a great question. I have to admit, I'm not as organized where I can say, all right, at this time for this many hours a day, I'm going to write. I wish that I could do that, but I definitely write every day. It's just a little more open-ended and a little more casual. And then I also have a hard time sitting at the computer for any great length of time. So I might sit down for maybe about 45 minutes. and then do that in spurts throughout the day. But I have to take breaks, or else I just get uncomfortable or overwhelmed with the task ahead of me.
Sure.
But I am a big believer in outlining. So before I start a novel, I have the entire book outlined chapter by chapter. Of course, once I start writing, I'm going to deviate from that outline considerably. But I'm a really big believer in outlines. And when I get stuck, or if I experience some kind of block, I can go right to my outline and remind myself exactly what I had envisioned and what I wanted to do. And I find that really helps. So I'm definitely someone who sits down in spurts, but I do think writing every day, especially if you're writing a novel, is critical to getting it done and writing something that you can proudly put your name on.
Good.
Robert?
Yeah, I believe in writing every day. I usually pick myself a word count for whatever work I'm working on. Usually it's right around 1,000 words a day, which some days I can pound that out in 45 minutes, and other days that's 4 or 5 hours. Yeah, but I try to shoot for 1,000 words a day, and just kind of. But I also am I don't write every day when I'm not working on something. So I kind of take breaks. I kind of, okay, for the next month, I'm going to edit, and then I don't write those months. I try to spend a certain amount of time just doing that. But I find it helps me to take breaks from the writing process. Otherwise, I fall out of love with it, and I'm like, why am I doing this? But yeah, that's me.
With you guys doing the process of writing your first draft and then you turn it over to the editor comes back with notes, what would you say the ratio is? I guess the better way to say it is percentage is that the editor's notes go into the final draft of what would be the published copy of your novel. Starting with Ken.
I think it depends a lot on the editor. Like I've taken on editing just recently quite a bit, considerable amount. And when I work with an author, I don't expect them to accept 100% of everything that I put there. There's things that have to be changed and things that are considerations, things to think about and decide whether or not you want to make this change or change it a different way. So for me, like anything that's a necessity is 100%. I mean, misspellings, missed words, wrong words, anything that's a consideration where I have to decide on how I want the plot to change, or that's something that I'd say maybe 50-50. But usually when an editor picks something like that out, they're picking it out as a reader. So if they're picking it out as a reader, then that means other readers are going to pick it out. So that's how you know there's a problem. It's just a matter of how you address it. Sometimes it's a real easy fix of adding just one line. And sometimes it requires a whole rewrite of part of a chapter. So for me, it very much depends on the editor. Some editors you really work well with, you gel with them, and you're able to make your book better. The best thing to think about, I think, is I tell this to a lot of people that when they ask about the editor-author relationship is, the editor's already going to be paid for their work. Their name may go on the inside, but the only thing they get out of editing your work is the satisfaction of making it the best possible work it can be. So that only benefits you, that they're on your side. And that's the best way to look at it and going into it is to realize that you have a friend helping you here, not somebody tearing you apart, even though it might seem like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best question that I saved for last, I ask this to every filmmaker, actor, director, anything that they may be, is now as you guys are, what we would say in the industry, what is your current take on the horror novel situation? We always have, I think each Josh, Robert, and Ken and I on the podcast have probably had this conversation where if you are an independent filmmaker or if you're in an independent production company, your hands are nowhere near as tied because 9 times out of 10 you are playing with your own money and you can gamble and make choices, and if it ends up being shitty, it's on you, it's out of your pocket. But the second you get picked up by, like, say, Warner Brothers, and they give you $180 million to make a Suicide Squad 2, like, you better have a pretty decent Suicide Squad 2 in a couple months or you're in some trouble. You're gonna be up a creek without a paddle. The reason I bring that up is because in the independent publishing scene, the vast variety of, like, a publishing company like Crystal Lake Publishing puts out, the stories are like crazy variety for people to choose from. Do you ever see like a variety like that hitting like a horror mainstream level, or do you think like the true variety is really going to always be at that independent level when they're picking out some horror stuff?
I think probably. I mean, I would love to. Of course, I haven't been inside a bookstore for over a year, but I would love to see more indie horror at the mainstream level. Walking into Barnes and Noble and seeing a display for a horror author other than Stephen Cain.
Yeah.
Right.
And a few. I mean, I think that would be great, but I also think that because of social media, we are now so much more aware of what authors are doing and what indie publishing companies are doing and what they're putting out there. And it's just really incredible. And it's fascinating to see so many people coming together, working toward this collective goal of getting independent voices out there. And for me, some of the best horror and thrillers that I've read in the past few years pretty much exclusively have come from indie publishers and indie authors. And I think it's great what these companies are providing authors as well. As someone who writes or who has written mostly more experimental novels that might not have ever gotten a shot, at the big time, it's nice to find people out there willing to give my voice a chance and other authors' voices a chance. So yeah, I'm thrilled at the way the indie scene is looking these days. It's just exciting to see so many new horror voices coming out.
He hit a really good point, and I'll be curious, Robert and Ken, with the presence of like social media and the accessibility of, you could pretty much open the window to what is your life at any given point in time, and there's going to be somebody unquestionably that has some kind of an interest is going to watch just for the sake of watching it on social media. Is that way to get in people's faces used by like an indie author, because you could do the same thing for getting your product or your voice be heard? Like, do you guys think that has helped the independent author scene strengthen over the last couple of years? Because from like a consumer perspective, I would say it definitely has gotten my attention more. So I'm curious, from an author standpoint, are you guys seeing like a increase in like fans or numbers or anything?
Oh yeah, I definitely am. I got 26,000 Twitter followers, and
right on.
That's great.
And yeah, so no, it definitely helps. It's something where, you know, I can throw something out there and I know at least 100 people will see it. I don't know how only 100 with 26,000 followers, but that's about the average number I seem to get without paying anything. Yeah. So social media is great for that. I mean, normally that, you know, I mean, before social media, how what would I do? Send out mailers? I don't even know. So yeah, but back to the previous question too. With the novel, I do think you're always going to see the greater variety in the independent scene, just because it's there's more risk there. So the big publishers they're not going to take risks. Yeah, until it's already established that, okay, this type of thing sells, they're not going to take risk. I mean, just like found fiction, you know, movies, you know, it's a completely independent thing until Blair Witch came along. Then suddenly they're everywhere. You know, this sell. You know, so that's kind of my take. I mean, movies and books are no different in that aspect. You have the big money behind it, and they're not going to take any risks.
Yeah.
What about you, Ken? What's your take on the indie horror publishing book scene right now?
Well, for the social media thing, and for me, social media has changed a lot over the years. And you know, it used to be great for selling books, but now it's just great for interacting with people who read your work. I mean, for me, that's more what it's about. I spend more time interacting with readers on Goodreads than I do any social media, and just you know, talking about dogs, for instance, on social media. You know what I mean? But yeah, you know, I'm a genre blender, so I like to mix that up a lot, and I do think that you see a lot of that, you know, the umbrella of horror expanding in the indie scene. But as you know, as you have successes like you know, Josh Malerman's Bird Box, and it's the only one I can really think of offhand, but you know, you see books like that make it in the mainstream, or like Love, Death, and Robots, that little animated series on Netflix where you have several stories from Jeff Brown's Cohesion Press, Cohesion Publishing, the anthology that he puts together, that are some genre blending as well with sci-fi and horror. You know, as you see that stuff making its way into media, I think that it will progress farther and farther on that level. So every one of their successes is a success for us in the possible future, you know? So I think it's just going to take time. And of course, they all want to see, you know, the really gory movies too. And that's great. I love that stuff, you know? I love seeing, you know, The Evil Dead with the chainsaw going right down the middle. Laugh my butt off after that, you know? But I do think that we're starting to see a trend where some genre blending is, you know, the horror landscape at the top level is starting to spread out a little bit and expand into different realms. So that could be cool.
Right on, man. Well, before we let everybody go, we'll go around and tell everybody where they can keep track of their work. So, Ken, where can everybody keep track of you on social media? Find out what you're up to. Find out the newest goings on adventures of Ken's dog, if you befriend him. But where can they find you at, man?
I have all my social media links on my website and my Goodreads link and my Amazon link. My website's kennethwcain.com. Really easy, and I love talking to people on social media. I talk craft sometimes. So, you know, sometimes I like talking about how writing works and everything, but I like talking about everything. You know.
Cool.
Robert?
I'm at Holt Horror everywhere. That's my Twitter. It's my Facebook, Goodreads, everything. WordPress, Holt Horror. Yep.
Easy. Josh?
Yeah, I'm same thing. I'm at Josh Hancock Books, Instagram, Facebook, and then finally back to appearing at conventions. You know,
Great.
it's been over a year since I think any of us have appeared in person somewhere. So I will definitely be making the rounds, hopefully this summer and into the fall. And that's just been, I mean, for me, even more than online is going to these horror conventions and meeting people has just been incredible. So I'll definitely be, like I said, making the rounds this summer into the fall.
Right on, man.
Yeah. Cool.
Charlie, tell everybody where they can find. Do you have the episode memorized? I'm sure you do. The No Sleep podcast can find your work.
Well, my resume is a little thinner than the three other guests on the panel. You can get a hold of me through the Horrific Network or Facebook page. The No Sleep podcast, the first story I published is called The Stain. They don't usually broadcast a story that's this long, but they dramatized it. It was about 50 minutes long. And it is on season 13, episode 17 of the No Sleep podcast. And then I had a much shorter piece that was broadcast just this past, I think it was like February. And it was on season 15, I believe, episode 23. And it was called The Roadkill Diaries. So if you want to check those out, they're a lot of fun. And it is a trip to hear actors and actresses, actually, speaking words that you wrote. So
I'll do you one better than that, is going to like a haunted house and listening to the actors and actors speak the words that you wrote, Charlie. Because that's what we were doing last Halloween, and it added a whole new level of coolness to the whole situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time out of your morning and or early afternoon, whichever coast you may be on. And everybody definitely go check out horror books, horror novels by all three of our panelists, Kenneth W, Cain, Robert Holt, and Josh. Your last name, Josh. I don't know what it is. Josh Hancock. And see Charlie on our channel, or we will always repost when he has a new story coming out as well, because when we let Charlie out of the dungeon, he usually comes back and he's like, I did something really dope. So I'm like, oh, cool, Charlie. So anyway, thank you for watching. And guys, thank you very much for coming on board. And I'm sure in the future we will have all of you back on the Horrific podcast when we are talking about whatever work you guys are coming out with to terrify the readers with. But again, thank you. And you guys watching, we will be back at 11 o'clock with Provost Park Pat. So stay tuned. More day 3 of Halfway to Halloween is coming at you.